I'm Rob Cowley. I am a senior Canadian art specialist, and I am one of the owners of Cowley Abbott in Toronto. Cowley Abbott is an auction company. We also do private sales, so we are based here in Toronto. We sell fine Canadian art as well as rare and important work by international artists. We hold online auctions monthly, and then we hold major live auctions twice a year. Our next one's at the end of May. And we also do private sales. So we have a private sale division that's run by Peter Roller. And so we, besides that, we also do appraisals and consultation related to our work.
Can I ask, do you have like an auctioneer voice? Is it like a performance?
It is a bit like a performance. It's very similar to my voice. It's a faster pace. It's not as fast as you see on TV or in the movies, where you typically see the style of a cattle auctioneer, or often the auto auctions are in that style. We speak at a faster pace, but not a pace that's that's impossible to understand for someone sitting in the room. So very close to my voice, but it is more performative as well. We have to project and make sure we have a steady pace and a steady tone. I'll just say this next artwork by PC Shepherd is being offered. We'll start the bidding here at $100,000, $100,000, I have $100,000, $110,000, $120,000, $130,000, we're at $130,000, $140,000 now, $150,000, $160,000, $170,000. Are we finished at $170,000? $170,000. Fair warning at $170,000, $170,000, and we're sold. $170,000.
Wow, that's so quickly.
That's still so good.
It's quick.
It's quick.
But it's still not, if you've ever seen a cattle auction, it's at a pace where I can't understand them.
You started the bidding at $100,000. How is that like par for the course of the types of art that you're working with?
In our live auctions, yes. So our live auctions are rare and important work. It tends to be work that we deem to be almost museum quality. So it tends to be the best examples by celebrated historical, post-war contemporary Canadian artists, as well as international artists. We've sold works upwards of $3 million by artists like Emily Carr and the Group of Seven. But in that sale, we also sell works between, or usually we start at about the $10,000 level and up from there. Our upcoming sale includes a fair number of works in the tens of thousands of dollars, and then a number of works in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So you mentioned museum quality. It's of importance. I have a question for you. How often is art showing up in a tote bag?
It happens.
Oh, actually.
Oh yeah, of course.
Can I ask you,
Yes.
is this museum quality?
Well, I couldn't answer that question simply based on looking at an artwork, especially if I didn't recognize the artist. So when you're talking about valuation within the market, and my background is the auction world, so it is based on the auction market, the first determining factor of value, which then would translate to the potential for inclusion in a museum, is the artist. So if the artist is a historically recognized and celebrated artist, or it could also be a contemporary artist that is renowned as well, artists like Kent Monkman is a great example, or Kim Dorland in Canada, that's the first factor, artist. If you were to tell me this was a work by an artist like Guido Molinari, who did paint a series of works in solid tones, I would say that it has the potential to be in a museum. However, it would be a smaller work by the artist, and so it probably wouldn't be for a museum. You would probably be relying upon what he's best known for. And what he's best known for, although he does kind of solid tone work, or he did, he's best known for hard edge color works, often stripes. So that would be what would be best. And you find in museums, you're looking at the artist first, but you're also then looking at the subject matter to see if it is the subject matter they're best known for. A great example of that is the Group of Seven. They are most celebrated for landscape, and then period. So you often hear about Picasso's blue period. That's usually in the general art discussion. But most artists, I would say, celebrated artists, there's certain periods that carry great value. For the Group of Seven, the 1920s are very important because it's the period when they were first associated. They disbanded in the early 30s, but their work tends to be of the greatest importance from the 20s. Jean-Paul Riopel, who was a Quebec abstract painter and world renowned, his work, the early 1950s, carry the greatest value. Paintings have sold in excess of $5 million in the 1950s. His work from the 1980s can sell for $20,000 and $30,000. So the first determining factor is the artist. Because I don't know the artist, I would say it may not be, but I will also say it could be an artist I'm not familiar with, who may also have a history in the galleries. I have a feeling you're going to tell me this is by you.
This is by me.
Yeah. Someday.
So what is the major difference then? So it's really interesting that you mentioned that. Even if it's by a famous painter, it still might not be museum worthy if it's not what they're famous for.
And it's not just fame. It has to do with important periods as well and rarity. So it could also be that a work with a high degree of rarity would also be in a museum. A very important portrait by Lauren Harris, who was a member of the Group of Seven. There are many portraits by the artist in museums. I shouldn't just say the most famous examples, because of course museums also try to represent the full, a wide career of very well-known artists and celebrated artists. So that can include works that fall outside what they're best known for, because you're trying to provide a full history of that artist's work. But typically, museums are also not going to be looking for duplication in many cases. So if they do have a rare example, like a portrait by, let's say, Lauren Harris, they may not want another one because they have that representation in their collection. One of the issues museums have in Canada and internationally is space. They only have so much space to store art. What you see on the walls is a very small percentage of what they have in the vault. Some museums, you're only seeing 3 or 4% of what they own on the walls. So they only have so much space. And in fact, what you're finding now, and you've found throughout history outside of Canada, is a lot of deaccessioning. So museums are selling art where they find they have duplication or where the artwork may not suit what the mandate for the museum is at that time. So they start selling art. And we've assisted the Art Gallery of Ontario, we've assisted Art Windsor Essex, we've assisted the Winnipeg Art Gallery as well in selling art over the last 10 years. And in those cases, it's where they're paring down and they're also raising funds to continue to grow their collection and to care for their collection.
This is so fascinating. Yeah. You don't need to hold this forever. Thank you so much for
entertaining. Can I say, it's very well painted.
Really?
It really is. The texture is beautiful, and it's not, it wasn't something that I wasn't confident it was an artist that certainly I would know, but at the same time, it is well painted. The materials are well prepared, so someday, could be in a museum.
Someday. This was from Dollar Store Paints. It's fine.
Oh, fantastic. There you are.
Okay, I'm just going to leave that there for now. The first thing that you look for is the artist, and we mainly talked about what makes it museum worthy.
Yeah.
But then you're not a museum. How do you decide the value of a piece of art?
Artist first. So a great example is Tom Thompson, who was a landscape painter who died in 1917. He drowned in Algonquin Park at the height of his abilities, most agree. His work, we have sold his work in excess of $2 million, and that is for a painting that is 8.5 by 10.5. His work sells regularly in the millions of dollars. He was a friend to the Group of Seven, an associate, and in many ways he was also was an inspiration to the Group of Seven as a friend. His work can sell for millions of dollars. His brother, George Thompson, who is a very strong painter as well, a landscape painter, his older brother, his work typically sells for about $2,500.
Ooh.
And so there you have a good example of how the artist carries. Lauren Harris is the same. He had a son, also Lauren Harris Jr. Lauren P. Harris was a very important painter. He was also an educator. He taught on the East Coast. He taught many of Canada's important post-war painters. But the difference in value of paintings by Lauren Harris have sold for over $10 million. Paintings by his son have sold typically as high as the tens of thousands of dollars. So artist is the first determining factor for us. We then look at the subject matter. Like I said, it could be that if it's a landscape by the Group of Seven from the 1920s, taking a period into account, that is going to carry a higher value than a landscape by a member of the Group of Seven from late in their career, typically. A.Y. Jackson from the Group of Seven, he painted from 1905 until the late 1960s. His work from the late 1960s can sell for $10,000, $12,000 sometimes, whereas his work from the 1920s, we sold a work for just under $1 million just a couple of years ago. So period's really important. The quality of the work, and that can be a bit of a tougher subject because you're looking at whether the artist essentially, how much time maybe they spent with a work. If the work was let's say for a demonstration, was a very quick composition, it may carry a bit less value. Whereas a work they spent a lot of time with, and and that can carry more value. The size is, of course, important. What we find now is that works that are what we call oversized, so if a work is, let's say, 10 feet wide, even by a major painter, that can have some challenges because, of course, most people don't have the space anymore in their homes. Oh. Especially in large cities like Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal, where space is at a premium, and new homes also tend to be open concept. Mm-hmm. They don't, it used to be, even when I started in the business decades ago, most homes had a lot of walls, and also corporations. Corporations were buying a lot of large art. What we found that the tradition over the last, let's say, 25 years is even workspaces have changed drastically in that you used to have a lot of walls. Even in the towers in downtown Toronto, a lot of those spaces that had a lot of office walls, the center of the floor is cubicles and the outside is glass. So they have very little space for very large art. Mm-hmm. And COVID changed that as well. Workspaces became smaller, and the focus on art to decorate spaces became a little bit different during that time. So very large art, even by major artists, we often say if you have a home with large walls, it's never been a better time to be looking for art because you have the space for something that not everyone does. And you can sometimes find that a very small example by an artist can sometimes exceed the value of a work that is, let's say, 30 by 40 inches, because you'll have a lot of collectors who have space, especially long-term collectors. Long-term collectors often are out of space, but if they see something that is 8 by 10, it'll fit somewhere. So they'll compete for that. Whereas if it's 30 by 40, they may not have the space for it.
I have simply never considered that part of the valuation of art is like the physical limitations of the art.
Yeah.
That's wild to me.
And it's like sculptures like that. I mean, we've handled sculpture that is sometimes, 20 feet high or has a huge kind of floor presence. Mm-hmm. That's not for everyone either. And so the audience, you have to take that into account, how large an audience is going to be for an artwork. Whereas when you hit that spot where it's a smaller work that has the right period, is an artist that's highly celebrated, also in fashion, which is another factor. An artist that is that's highly collectible in the current market, you can be more aggressive on the value.
What does that mean by they're in fashion? What makes
Maud
an
Lewis
artist?
is a great example. So Maud Lewis, the folk painter from Nova Scotia, she has always been popular at auction. When I started in the business in the early 2000s, her work would often sell between usually $5,000 and $10,000 at the high end. She now has had a work sell for, I think, over $100,000. We regularly sell her work in excess of $20,000 and $30,000. And a huge reason for that was the movie Maudie that was released in 2016, which starred Ethan Hawke and Sally Hawkins. That gave a huge amount of attention to an artist who was known but not known by the biggest general audience. And she was also affordable. So it meant that people that saw the movie or fell in love with her work could potentially afford it. And so she's very much in fashion because of that. The Group of Seven continue to be in fashion, as they have been as long as I've been in the industry. You find artists from like the 19th century, watercolorists that used to be very much in fashion are less so now. So we'll be more conservative with an estimation at auction or evaluation than we would be for a member of the Group of Seven, let's say.
Can you provide an example of one of these 19th century watercolorists who have, for lack of a better word, kind of fallen off? Not fallen into nothingness, but like what's an example?
They're still appreciated. They're still highly, and it also sometimes has to do with the fact that the collectors that have come along may not have the same taste as the collectors that have been supporting that market for so many years. One example I would say is an artist, even like Frederick Werner, who painted across Canada. He painted the Rockies as well. He's a watercolorist. His paintings of often of even just buffalo on the plains would often perform very, very well. We would see them sell sometimes in excess of $100,000, whereas now you typically see them sell around between $10,000 and $20,000, maybe a bit higher, but there isn't the same level of excitement around his work. Sometimes, again, because collectors have a collection that's already established by him, and you also don't see as much in terms of promotion through exhibitions of his work, because it's not as in fashion right now as what more contemporary taste might be. So there's a lot of factors that play into that.
Everything you're saying makes total sense, but it's also stuff that I've never thought about. Like the idea that the movie, which I heard of, which is how I learned about Maud Lewis, is impacted the value of her work That's shocking to me.
And it doesn't always happen, because if an artist, like there was, I think Ed Harris was in a movie, he played Jack Pollock. Not Jack Pollock, I'm sorry. Jack Pollock is a dealer from, Jack Pollock.
Jack Pollock.
But there's also
Jackson.
Jackson Pollock. There's also a Jack Pollock in Canada dealer. So although the movie was very popular, the value of Jackson Pollock's work was so high that you're not necessarily going to see new collectors. Someone that has never really collected art before is not suddenly going to spend necessarily $10 million on a painting. Whereas Maud Lewis's work, because it was selling between $10,000 and $20,000 typically, there was an opening for new collectors to participate in the market. It was a very rare occurrence where you had a movie being made about an artist whose fame didn't also include almost stratospheric value in their artwork. Typically when movies are made about artists, it's usually those artists of great renown internationally. So that was a special case for sure.
Who is buying art? Like, what type of person are they? Are they only buying one piece, or are they making whole collections? Do you have a read on that?
We do. It's a real mix. You find that there are collectors out there who we may see for one sale who may buy something that they have. It could, and sometimes it can be very subject specific. So it could be that it's a painting of the neighborhood where they lived as a child, where they come and they participate in the auction, they buy the painting, and we may not see them again for 4 or 5 years or ever again. Most of our collectors, though, are active collectors, so they will have a collection of some kind. So whether it's a collection of 10 works or 200 works, they are usually active in the market. And that's for the live auctions. We also do online auctions every month under different themes. And in those sales start, we have works in those sales that are $300 and $400, which invites any collector and allows, and that's where you really, you hope to start the journey for collectors in those sales, and typically you do. And then as the interest grows, and maybe also as they move on in life and have a bit more income that will allow them to step up in terms of the value level, they may move on then to the live sales and participate there. But it's a real mix. You find it's all different backgrounds, definitely. You find that it's people that sometimes have grown up in homes where art was appreciated and collected. Sometimes it's people that have just learned about it through friends or from going to museums. So it's a really wide variety of individuals, which, and it can be hard sometimes to define, because again, there is a real variety in terms of collectors.
This might be unfair to say, but I've always assumed that the type of person to collect art had a certain vibe to them. Like, they also know how to talk about wine properly.
Yep.
They have the walls that can have big art on it. So that's just not a fair evaluation?
I mean, it really is all types. We find in the industry that the number one issue that we wrestle with in terms of new clients is apprehension, because a lot of people have that idea from movies and TV, and it's usually the depiction. Even auctions themselves are usually depicted as these events that are exclusive. You need a ticket to get in, and if you scratch your nose, you'll buy something. It's a very different depiction, and it's always exaggerated, like most things are in television and movies. But you find that although there are collectors like that collect everything and are highly, cultured in many different areas and travel the world and have giant homes where they can house any size of artwork, you'd be surprised at the number of, collectors that are just everyday individuals, and this is their passion, and has been their passion as well throughout their life. But it really is all types of people. But it's funny, we find that often even people when they consign to sell an artwork, they can't believe sometimes that they're allowed to come to the auction. They think that it's something they're not supposed to be a part of because they're not going to buy anything. But we talk about, auction is very much a spectator sport. You get to see what's happening in the industry and what's happening in the art market just by sitting there. And I would say more than half of the room, the auction gallery, is usually spectators. It's usually people that are not necessarily going to buy anything at all.
You describing it as a spectator sport just made it all make sense in my brain. Like, the baseball season is starting literally today.
Yeah.
Love watching baseball.
Yeah.
I've never played baseball in my life.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's such an interesting way to put it. So how would you handle somebody who is talking about this seeming gap in what they perceive to be the value of art? Like, maybe they think it's worth $50, $100, and then the value that it is sold for. There seems to be this cognitive dissonance that happens there.
Yeah, I mean, auction, it's a little bit easier at auction for us to talk about it because when we value an artwork, we're also comparing it to the past. If somebody brings us an artwork by Jack Bush, let's say, who is a highly celebrated abstract painter from Toronto, whenever we value an artwork by Jack Bush, we're looking at what similar works have also achieved at auction in recent years. His work has sold, we've sold his work in excess of $800,000, close to $900,000, and his work can sell anywhere from $50,000 if it's an early work and a representational work, all the way up to that point if it's a if it's a well exhibited and illustrated in many books and has been in, and has been through many different collections as well, well-known collections. That would push the value to a higher level. If it's an artist that has had very limited auction history or no auction history, often we are not able to assist because there is no track record for the artist, or it's a more limited value. And so, we value artwork all day, every day. The majority of artwork we value is going to be of a nominal or a decorative value, which is under $500. So for us, we're very much looking at the track record for each artist. We typically are not handling much artwork by artists that don't appear at auction. Mm-hmm. So that there is that science to it. You still have to understand the factors of what you're looking at. If you were to just kind of look in a database and look at Jack Bush's work without any background in the artist's work, you may not understand that you also have to do things like look through the catalogue raisonné that Sarah Standers wrote and go through that and look at the exhibition history for the painting, the literature history, the ownership history, read the essay that's included to see what was important about this painting. So all those factors go into it. If it's an artist that's had no history at auction or only had a couple of paintings at auction or not had works at auction in the last 20 years, it's going to be a much more limited value. And typically then you may put a conservative value on an artwork like that, and the market then will dictate kind of where the interest is, maybe beyond that estimate we provide.
It's a very practical and logical approach to valuing art.
It is.
And I guess the value of like a painting being sold for $10 million, which is a real value that paintings get sold at, that doesn't come out of nowhere.
No.
How do you get from how does the market decide that you're valuable?
That is a very complex question. There is the quality of the work, of course, stands as a big part of the interest in the market of an artist. But there is also an aspect of the fortune of an artist's history. So when you look at the Group of Seven, we talk a lot. I keep coming back to them because they are kind of the most celebrated group in the history of Canada in terms of associations of artists. The Group of Seven were 10 members, 7 original members and 3 additional members later. We talk a lot about the contemporaries of the Group of Seven. The Group of Seven were painting, landscape painting, during the teens, 1920s and onward, at a time when many painters were. They were mostly based in Toronto, somewhere in Winnipeg, somewhere in Montreal. And they were surrounded by colleagues and other artists, many of whom painted at a level of quality, subjectively, that was equal to them, some exceeding some of the members, but they weren't members of the Group of Seven. The Group of Seven were supported by the National Gallery of Canada during the 1920s. They also had major exhibitions overseas at Wembley in the UK. So they were very much recognized as a driving force and as a very important association of painters. Now, their value didn't take place necessarily during the 1920s. The value grew over time beyond that point. There's a lot of controversy about them when they were first painting, and the value wasn't the same at all. But when we look back, we look at a lot of the painters that were around them, and you can have painters from that time that may sell for $1,000 for an 8.5, 10.5 painting. The painter may have painted with Tom Thomson, whose same paintings sell for millions of dollars. So while we do look at factors like ownership history and exhibition history, which certainly plays a role for the Group of Seven, and literature, meaning if an artwork is reproduced in countless books about an artist and movements in Canadian art, that adds to the value. You may have this other painter that was painting at the same time, maybe even worked with members of the Group of Seven, who didn't have the fortune of being represented by the galleries we celebrate today, by being part of an association like the Group of Seven, by being in the right exhibitions, like it's easy to judge now. So there's a lot of factors like that can be. There certainly is a political element sometimes. when you look at painters from a period of time internationally, why Mark Rothko paintings are worth tens of millions of dollars, whereas painters that maybe he even painted with are a fraction of that. So there's a lot of that, and it's driven by taste, it's driven by demand in the market as well. But you can usually support that demand by, the importance of the artist's work within a history. The quality of the work also does play a huge factor, especially once you learn about them. We every day hear from collectors, or from, I should say, the general public, who will come in and say, well, I could do that, if we have a painting by an abstract painter on the wall. Once you start to talk to them about the painter and about what makes their work important, and about the fact that maybe they, like an artist like Jack Bush, who showed in New York and was highly celebrated there, who showed in the UK as well. He had representation outside of Canada before being in Canada. When you start running through kind of what makes the artist valuable, you usually will see kind of the light turn on for the individual. And that's a lot of it. Like, again, it comes back to apprehension and also education. You find that unfortunately, we're in a place now, certainly in Canada, and you see it in other places of the world, where the education around visual art is very limited unless you seek it out. And so you don't always see that. But it can be a complex question. It can depend on the artist. And certainly there's a lot of historical factors that drive the value of an artwork. But there is, when you actually go back right to the beginning of the history of an artist, you can also sometimes find where the artist was fortunate to be represented by a certain gallery, or to be within an association, or to be in a certain exhibition. So all those things can help.
It makes total sense. It is just such a strange feeling to think like two people can be like painting the same landscape, similar styles. Yeah. One of them just has a couple of different factors. Yeah. And their work is just more valuable.
And we see it. We see it with, a good example is an artist named Ralph Burton, who painted with A.Y. Jackson, the member of the Group of Seven. So, and their compositionally, their works can be very similar. Burton was a younger artist. He was in many ways mentored by A.Y. Jackson. And A.Y. Jackson's work, as I said, can sell for close to $1 million. His sketches tend to sell as 8.5, 10.5 inch sketches. Typically, they're going to sell between 10,000 all the way up to 100,000, sometimes beyond that if it's very rare. Ralph Burton's sketches of the same size are typically not even going to hit $10,000. But again, Ralph Burton wasn't a member of the Group of Seven. He didn't have the same exhibition history. The quality of work is very good, but he just didn't have that. Even though these, again, were artists that would paint side by side, their histories are completely different.
Fascinating. It's neat to know that it's not even like a thought experiment, hypothetical thing. It is something that we see in history.
For sure, it is. And that's the thing, is that there's never a case where myself or the specialists that work in our company are going to say, we have no idea why this artwork is valuable. You can always speak to the factors that involve the value of an artwork, but you can also recognize and you can also identify the fact that there are many artists that are undervalued, without a doubt, especially in the history of historical and post-war Canadian art. There's many artists that we will say, if a collector is considering 3 or 4 works of art in an auction, we might say, well, this is actually a stronger example by this artist that doesn't have the same market, the same level of attention. So in my opinion, this might be a better investment, because works of higher quality and rarity, those tend to hold value. And if an artist becomes more popular in 30 or 40 years, then the focus will be on the best of their work, what we deem to be the best of their work. So sometimes you can be looking at 2 paintings. One might be, let's say, a later example by a well-known painter, and so it may have a value that is not going to be at the high end of the market for that well-known painter. Whereas you may have beside it, at the same value, you may have a very strong example by an artist that doesn't have such a huge market, and a market that is so high at the high end. And so sometimes you can have a comparable value, but if a client asks us the difference and what we think, sometimes you'll, in terms of investment, you may say, you'll discuss that with them. You'll say, well, this is a better example by this artist. This is a good example by the better known artist and the more celebrated artist. But in terms of overall value, there's the potential for this painting by the lesser known artist to grow in value over time. However, the example by the very well-known artist may very well just hold that value where it is. And we see that with many painters in Canadian art.
How much do people buy as an investment versus just like they liked it. It's a cute piece of art.
You get both, and you get a lot of collectors that take both into account. We typically, it's always, people will sometimes ask, what should I buy? They hate to hear it, but we often will say, buy what you like. However, it's not as simple as that. We'll often, if a collector comes in during one of our live auction previews and says, let's say I have this much, I have $20,000 to spend, what should I buy? We typically will say, why don't you take a look around, look at the catalog, and let us know, and in 20 minutes or a half hour, tell me 5 works you're interested in. They have an interest in that caught your eye. Then I can talk to you. Then I can say, okay, well, here's what the market is for this artist. This is very in fashion right now. This is a great example by this artist. So buying what you like, it isn't just about saying, just pick whatever you like and buy it. You can also then bring into that the investment aspect. It's a very important aspect of our collecting for many collectors. Understandably, it is, like anything else where you're investing a great deal of money into the market. It's important to be educated about what you're buying, especially if you have that, you have that plan in the future, let's say, to pass it through your family, to donate it, to sell it again in the future. If you're looking for it to hold value, then certainly if somebody says, these are the 5 paintings that I'm drawn to, we can then discuss that with them. But you find that a great deal of collectors who are collecting historical and post-war and contemporary Canadian international art, they have that in mind if they're spending money beyond a certain level. But it isn't the driving force. We find most great collections are driven by passion. First, with value in mind, with investment in mind. Sometimes if you see a collection where someone has just bought names, so they've just said, I want a painting by each member of the group of 7, and as they become available, I'll just buy them. I'll go talk to someone and say, do you have anything by Frank Johnston? And they'll have 2 paintings and I'll just buy one, rather than being patient, waiting for the example they like. We can sometimes go into those collections and they don't have the same effect on visually for us as a collection that's been driven by passion. Even though, a very passionate collector sometimes will have work by artists we don't even know, but there'll be such strong examples that maybe speak to the other works that they kind of stand on their own, even if they don't have a great deal of value. So it's definitely a part of it, but it's not, if you go into kind of collecting art with only the investment aspect in mind, you probably won't enjoy it because you'll be kind of buying, and with only that in mind, you'll be hoping that you can part with the work at a certain time and make money. And, not every work of art also raises in value, even by major artists. If you look back 20, 30 years, there's some artists that have held value, but we haven't seen a great deal of difference in their market.
It seems like such a fickle world from what you've told me.
I mean, it isn't. It's like anything. I mean, it's like there are tens of thousands of artworks that are sold in Canada every year, easily. I mean, right now especially, there's never been a better time to collect, especially with online auctions. There are 3, 4, 5 online companies doing online auctions every single month, if not more, and then live auctions by a smaller amount of companies twice a year. There's so much art available, and like any area where there's investment opportunity, even if you're looking at the stock market or you're looking at jewelry or anything else, it just depends what your filters are. If you're collecting, again, based on your passion and your interest with investment in mind, chances are you're going to put together a collection you're very happy with. So even if it has to stay on your wall for a painting stays on your wall for 20 years, because there's no opportunity to sell that painting and make a bit of money or achieve the same amount as what you paid, you're going to enjoy it. There's nothing worse than regret in any kind of market like this. And so what you don't want is a collector to chase an artwork because of the name or because of the importance of the artwork, but if they don't have an interest in it, then it can sometimes just be a reminder on the wall of something they feel like they maybe spent too much money on.
I never really thought of, because I understood art in theory is there's art, the visual component, art, the investment component. I never thought about the bridge in between them.
Yeah.
Because you can invest in a stock.
Yes.
You don't get to look at the stock.
That's right.
If it looks at you, it's pretty stressful compared to art, which is just this beautiful thing that has value outside of, or at least I like to believe that has value outside of that investment component.
It does for sure. I mean, there's cultural value to it. There's, And it's just, living with it. Living with, these works are, especially historical artwork, they're pieces of history. So when you're talking about, we talk about even Cornelis Krieghoff, who was a painter from Amsterdam that, painted in Canada during the 19th century. And when you're looking at artists, there's so many artists through our history, especially in Canada, where so much of our artwork falls in the last 200 years, so falls, just before the Confederation, all the way through to important periods through Canadian history, all the way up until now when we're looking at work that speaks very much to issues today, with a drive much more towards Indigenous art and towards so many more social issues. But you see that in the 1960s as well, you see it in the 1950s, you see it in the 20s and 30s, even with female artist representation, how the growth of that over the last century as well. So there is that as well. There's, living amongst a history with artwork around you as well. And that's why as well, we talk a lot about collectors before they make their first purchase, and just attending auctions and paying attention and reading about the artist they have an interest in and learning about it. And it's funny because, people don't always want to hear that, but it's the same that you would hear if you were in the stock market. Most people are going to say you should be reading about the companies, and you should be, obviously you have professionals that you work with, but, trying to educate yourself to that so that you really have an understanding of what you're investing in. You're not blindly going into it and just kind of, finding your way.
That's true. Also, nobody is forcing you to buy art, I guess. If you just wanted to look at it, you could probably Google it.
And even auction previews. We do previews every month for our online sales, but then twice a year we're doing our major live auctions, and we preview those for 2 weeks in Toronto, and they're completely open to the public. We don't expect anyone coming through the door to be a buyer. We'd love that. But many people that come in are just coming in to see the work. And they may be collectors who aren't buying and haven't bought in 5 years, and they're just waiting for the right artwork to come along. But it really is, especially as professionals in the industry, that's how we learn. We've learned from immersion. We've learned from seeing, countless works by so many of the artists that we handle. And so that really is a great deal of what of collecting. Is learning and spending time with it and seeing it. And and again, it's meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to be, it's a social experience. That's what art is supposed to be.
I've always been, it's the apprehension again of just thinking, am I supposed to be in this space? Yeah. I've seen galleries, I've walked by them, and I always think, oh, that's beautiful. It's like a museum, but for a very specific type of art. And then I'm I'm not allowed in there, though. Yeah. They'll want me to buy something.
And it's completely not the case.
Really?
In most cases, I can tell you most reputable galleries, certainly, and I would put that amongst the majority of galleries that I know in Toronto and across Canada. They're happy to have people in. For us, so much of our business is the business side of things. It's doing emails and talking to clients and cataloging and things like that. So you don't spend all your time talking about and enjoying the art. So when someone comes in and wants to talk about art, it's great for us because we can talk about the art. And there's never an expectation, certainly for me or my colleagues, when someone comes in and wants to talk about a painting on the wall, I never think in my mind, this person's going to buy this. You're happy just to talk about it. And you're hoping that you also help them to establish even the smallest level of appreciation or learn something about the artist that maybe they carry forward, and maybe they go across the street to the AGO, or maybe they go to another gallery and just learn about it. Because for us, like I said earlier, you find that there's so little formal education around art history in Canada at this point that that the auction houses, I think, feel a certain level of responsibility, and so do the galleries, the retail galleries, around providing that education. And so much of our promotion and the media and things like that, it's really, in our catalogs, we're telling the story of these works of art. All of that goes online as well. And it's amazing how many times even students doing projects in grade school reach out to us and say, I'm doing a project on A.Y. Jackson. Can you tell me about, because they don't know where to start. Yeah. And online, it's much better than it used to be. There's fantastic resources now. But yeah, for us, we're delighted if people come in just to talk about the art, and most galleries are the same.
That's really reassuring. And I also, I know that there's part of it that's beneficial. The more people who appreciate art, the more people will buy art, 100%. Obviously. Yeah, but then also just the idea of you've taken me away from having to do another email.
That's it.
This is great.
Exactly. And and for us too, it's, a reminder of why we're in the business. I mean, for all of us as well, we could be, you could be a salesperson in a lot of different industries or be a specialist in a million different industries. The fact that I'm able to surround myself with so much beautiful art and important art, and I've had the opportunity to see such incredible collections and learn from academics who are our colleagues who write for our catalogs, all of that is never lost on us, and it's nice when we're reminded of it. It's nice when someone comes in and wants to talk about something that we've sold or about an artist, or it's really fantastic for us.
It is very clear that part of the valuation of art is like the provenance, like the story, where the market is and all that stuff. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about this trend in AI generated art, which kind of like strips the visual from all of that context that's kind of defining its value.
Yeah.
Like, how do you feel about AI art?
It's scary, for sure. It's scary for a lot of reasons. I think it's scary because of, I think primarily in our world, the forgery aspect. We're watching AI learn very quickly. The difference in AI from 18 months ago to today is staggeringly, has been evolved in a staggering way. I think that is part of it. And what comes with that is the danger of the legacy of artists and the legacy of original art. I think there's a place certainly for digital art, and there always has been, and there's a value to that. And you worry a lot about aspects like that. You worry a lot about devaluing original art. So a computer learning about how Emily Carr painted, and by analyzing all of the paintings we know of that Emily Carr painted, and then creating something new, is dangerous because it devalues the artist. It devalues the artist's work in my mind, and it devalues the experience of the artist. It devalues the history of the artist as well. So it's a very interesting time, and I think we, most agree in every industry is that there will need to be heavy regulation. And we're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing it even in writing and art, and the ability to write a long text very easily that's generated by AI as well. It's a very dangerous time. There's so much potential for it, like there always is with technology. It's just about trying to ensure that we're not infringing on art. And of course, the historical artists are one aspect, but current artists, living artists and practicing artists, whether they are in museums like the AGO or represented by major museum or galleries like Bogie Gallery or Maybury Gallery, those artists as well, who are living artists, are their works going to be able to be easily duplicated and sold for a fraction of the price. Those are the big aspects in our market that create real apprehension around AI. Is how controlled will it be, and how much are you devaluing the role of a creator in its use?
That is an excellent, it's a very complimentary answer, because I went across the street to the AGO the other day and interviewed Adam Welch about
fantastic,
what did he think about AI art? And he took the approach of AI is a tool like any other. It can do good, it could do bad, but it was a very artsy answer ultimately. So it was really interesting to hear there is from somebody who's an expert in valuing art, that it can have an impact, that you expect. Do you expect it to have an impact if it doesn't get regulated further?
I do. I do. I think especially in cases where, let's say, a home decoration company that sells, that already sells like giclées. So they sell kind of artwork that is machine printed onto a canvas, and it's sold for a couple $100s. And you see them in homes, and they're nice and they decorate very well. And I think we already saw it with, there was a lot of controversy. There's always been controversy around, especially as artists' identities online, especially with Instagram, have grown, how many designs have been stolen, let's say, from an Instagram artist and used on a t-shirt sold by Target. Those are the areas I think that are going to be the trickiest, because you could potentially have, if AI learns how a certain, takes 25 or 30 or 100 images of artwork by an artist, and then can create work in that style that isn't the artist's work, but it's their style, and then puts that on a giclée that can be sold for $300. for the artist that sells that work for $10,000 and $15,000, and that's their living, and they've built to that over decades, I think there's a danger there. Adam Welch, who's fantastic and a colleague of ours, he's right. The tools are incredible. Just like digital art. When digital art and video art, there was apprehension around those as well. We arrived in a place where the understanding of that and the control around that, and the value around that as well. So people value digital art that is created by the user, and you see AI aspects of that already. It really depends how it's being used. In a business where we're selling art, we're always, our ears are always perked around things like forgery, things like copying, and misrepresentation. So that's where my fears lie with AI. Just seeing how, again, month by month, how much it grows and how close it gets. I mean, just this week I saw one of the AI engines has added the ability to take a photo and put it in the style of Van Gogh, in the style of South Park, the cartoon, in the style of an Asian animator as well. And it's really scary. It's interesting and it's entertaining, but you see already how you literally are just dragging an image and telling it what to do. So I think there's a lot there that is exciting at the same time in terms of creation, but I think it's also really important to understand and to maintain what we value in terms of creators that are creating and not relying 100% on a machine without any sense of actual creation.
Yeah, and I think going into this conversation, I'm generally in the same space. I think the most interesting thing, though, is just like hearing how much of the market's taste and trends impact how much art is valued. And so if we're seeing trends where like things are no longer valuable, nobody has a unique voice anymore, or if that voice is no longer, it can be unique for a moment and then duplicated a million times. That's going to change the way we value. Wow. Thank you so much.
We will always have a market. We will always value the artwork of great rarity and importance. I think it's just about, trying to hold on to the aspects that what makes those artists important, what makes those movements important, like Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, Expressionism, all those things that, that having an understanding around those things and some education around those things that, they're not just, again, created with the click of a button.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
This has been very enlightening.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to talk to you about it.